In the blasted battlefields of Trench Crusade, the Mechanized Infantry stands as an ironclad symbol of faith and firepower. Their armour, weathered by shellfire and scarred by relentless conflict, tells the story of endless war. And in today's video I'll be working on a Mechanized Infantry Lieutenant, but rather than rehashing the full painting process, I'm going to be doing a deep dive into one detail that can transform your models, which is battle damaged transfers. I've been using a lot of transfers lately, but usually just skim over the process. But this time I'll slow down and focus entirely on how to apply them realistically, the tools you'll need, and the step-by-step process on how to make those markings look truly battered, chipped, and lived in. So let's get into it, and step one is the preparation. And before getting the model fully assembled and painted up, I normally take this opportunity to quickly map out roughly where I want to place all of my transfers, along with deciding whether or not to remove the existing logos or emblems, producing a larger surface area and allowing for a greater number of transfers to then be applied. And to remove the emblems from the model, you're going to need either a hobby knife or a pair of clippers, along with some sanding sticks or some kind of sandpaper to smooth out the area. And I prefer to use an old dull hobby knife, and even though it's old and not very sharp, it's still sharp enough to cut through the resin or plastic of miniatures, while at the same time not being sharp enough that I lose a finger every time I make a slip with the knife. And that's why sometimes the clippers can be the better option. But in either case, the goal here is to try and remove any of the larger chunks of resin or plastic, and then just come in with the sanding strips and buff the area out until it's fairly smooth. It doesn't have to be perfect, as we are trying to make some battle damaged armour, so any dents and chips aren't going to look out of place anyway. And if you are going to be sanding down 3D printed resin models like this one, I would highly recommend using some kind of respirator mask during the entire sanding process, as this does produce a lot of fine dusty resin particles, which is not something you want to be inhaling into your lungs. So I always make sure I wear a full respirator mask when performing tasks like this, along with clearing up all the dusty resin from my desk, which was produced from the sanding, before moving on to the next step. And once all of the emblems had been removed and smoothed out, I then got the model assembled, and the only other thing to do before applying the actual transfers themselves is to actually paint the model up. And as I said, I'm not going to go into details of how I did that. I painted a very similar model in my last video, so if you want to know how to paint up the red armour in this model, you can check out my previous video on how to paint a trench cleric. And the final step of the preparation is to apply some gloss varnish to all of the areas that are about to receive the transfers. And this is a really important step, as it not only protects the underlying paint from getting any damage when applying the transfer to the surface, but it also creates a really nice and flat surface for the transfer to be applied to, and makes it really easy to move the transfer around once you have applied it, which in turn will reduce the chance that the transfer will rip when you're trying to move it into place. And you can apply this gloss varnish via a airbrush or by a standard brush. Either way is suitable. And as this model was quite large and open, I just decided to go in quickly with the airbrush. And after allowing a few hours for the varnish to dry, it's now time for step 2, which is the transfer application. And the first thing you'll need for this is the transfers themselves. And the transfers you use are completely down to you, but for Trench Crusade models like this one, I like to use some Warhammer Black Templar transfers, along with some Templar style transfers that I got from eBay, which are from the company The Mighty Brush. The next thing you're going to need is some micro sol and micro set. It is possible just to use water for this, however, for the best finish you are best to use the micro sol and micro set. You're also going to need some kind of tweezers or implement to hold the transfer, and I would highly recommend getting a set of reverse grip tweezers, and these allow the transfers to be gripped in place without having to apply any pressure to the tweezers, which makes it much more comfortable and easy to apply when it comes to the application. And when it comes to the application itself, you firstly want to get the model in a position that is going to make it easy to apply the transfer. And I just used a few large corks that I had lying around to balance the model in position. I'm then going to use some of the micro set, and I'm going to be decanting this into a paint well, but normally you can just dip the transfer directly into the bottle if it's small enough. However, I spilt my bottle a few months back and there's not very much left in it, so it's easier for me just to decant it into a paint well. And I'm just going to soak the transfer inside the paint well of the micro set for around 20 seconds, and then remove it from the solution and give it around 10 to 15 seconds to dry off. And by then the transfer should be movable on the backing paper, but if not, just be patient and eventually it should work its way loose. I'll then apply a thin layer of the micro set to the area I'm going to be applying the transfer, and then carefully position the transfer in place using the tweezers, trying to position the transfer as flat as possible to the surface that it's going to be applied to, and then just use a brush to slowly slide it off. And from here you just want to make sure the transfer has firstly applied flat and has not curled on any of the edges or corners. And if it does, you'll just have to go in with a damp brush and try and get underneath the transfer to flick it out. And it can be quite tempting to leave some of those folded corners, but trust me, in the long run, it's better to address it now, as it will produce quite a nasty line that will be hard to remove later on in the process. And once I'm happy that there are no folds, I'll just use the tip of the tweezers to move the transfer into position. And I'll then just come in with a cotton bud to wick away any of the excess micro set, and also just to make sure that the transfer is fully flattened down and that there are no air bubbles or anything like that underneath the surface. I'll then proceed to apply the rest of the transfers to the model, and then allow the micro set around 20 to 30 minutes to fully dry. And then come in with the micro sol, which is the second bottle in the set. And I'm just going to apply a layer of this over all of the transfers that have been applied. And again coming back in with a cotton bud to wick up any of the excess micro sol. And then I'll just leave that to dry overnight, and that should help the transfer conform to the surface of the model, giving it a nice and realistic painted on look. And now that the transfers had been applied, it was time for the final step, which is the weathering process, as at the moment they are a really bright white colour, which is a bit unrealistic for battle-worn armour. And as I had the silver out to edge highlight all of the armour panels, I thought I would use the same silver, which was some Army Painter heavy metal, and use this to apply a little bit of battle damage to all of the transfers in the way of some scratches and chips. And I'm just going to go in and apply 3 or 4 scratches or chips to each of the transfers. And there really is a lot of different ways that you can add battle damage to all of these transfers. But I first of all like to go in with a little bit of silver, which helps to represent some deeper scratches and chips that have also penetrated the red colour of the armour as well. And once that was applied, I then went in with some Liquitex transparent raw umber. I've started to use more inks of late, and the transparent nature of this raw umber really helps to take away that bright white look from all of the transfers, while still being transparent enough to not alter the red armour panel colour underneath. And I generally just kind of apply this randomly to each one of the transfers, and then switch to a clean brush and kind of stipple it out randomly as well, trying to make sure I cover between 70 to 90% of the transfer, which is going to give it a more yellowish, brownish tint, which is much more fitting for a Trench Crusade model. I then like to come in with the same colour that I used for the armour and apply more scratches and chips using the original armour colour. And this should just give the impression of some shallower scrapes and chips in comparison to the silver applied previously. And it's really up to you how far you want to take the weathering. As I said, there are multiple different ways of applying weathering, and this is just one of the ways I prefer. But you can also use enamel and oil washes like villainy inks and streaking grime to create additional streaks and smears of dirt and oil as well. And you can also go in with things like rust and blood effects to really push that grimdark look. but I was happy with the model at this stage, and the only other thing I really did that would have affected the transfers was give the entire model a coat of villainy ink's decrepit filth, followed by a removal pass to wipe away all of the excess, which does help to add additional dirt and grime to the transfers as well. And once everything has been applied and has fully dried, you can then go in with the varnish finish of your choice. I normally prefer to go for a matte finish, but the choice is really up to you. And I hope you enjoyed this deep dive on how to apply transfers and weathering. And if there are any other topics that you want me to do a deep dive on, for example dry brushing or something of that nature, then just let me know in the comments down below. And as always, a big thank you to all of my Patreon subscribers, and I'll see you in the next one.